everyone, and thank you. Welcome. I think we're ready to start the meeting. So this is the meeting of the Police and Crime Panel on the 5th of February. Before moving to the agenda, I'd just like to thank the Commissioner and the Chief Constable and your relevant staff on two counts. First of all, thank you for laying on the day last week for new members to see some of your operations, and it's very much valuable, and also for giving us some early alert as to what might be going into the papers for today. And thank you for answering all the questions. There was quite a lot that was sent to you. They will be published, and we very much appreciate getting those in plenty of time. As you'll expect, there will be following up questions in due course. So perhaps we could start by taking the minutes of the 20th of November. If people are content to accept those as a true record. Thank you very much. Those have been accepted. The minutes of the confirmation hearing for the incoming Chief Executive for the Commissioner, held on the 8th of January. People content to accept those as a true record? Thank you very much. And if we can take any apologies.
No apologies today. We have a full complement of members.
Thank you very much. And item 4, if I can do declarations of interest by members and officers. Any declarations, first of all, on pecuniary matters? None. On non-pecuniary matters? Not declared. Thank you. Well, that takes us to item 5, the work programme.
Thank you. Reports before members today, nothing in particular to draw your attention to, just any items that you want to be added to the work programme we'll build in going forwards, and once we have confirmation of the dates for 24-25, we'll be able to populate that more fully.
Thank you, Jo, for that succinct report. Any questions at all on the work programme? No, thank you very much. Then if we can move then to what euphemistically we will call the main event, I think, today. There's item 6, the Police and Crime Commissioner's proposed precept and budget. You've received the questions, we've received the answers. Thank you very much. We will probably start with some of those just to ask a few more details, but I'll hand over first of all to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think we've just got 4 slides to put up, haven't we? Thank you. As if by magic. Love it when technology works. So today, my proposals for the Police Precept 24-25 budget reflect the priorities that I've already set in my Make Not Safe plan for 21-25. Preventing crime and protecting people from harm. Responding efficiently and effectively to community needs, and supporting victims and survivors and witnesses in our communities. So as you're aware, most funding for the police comes from the government grant, with the remainder, approximately a third, from council tax. That is the police precept. The way the government grant is allocated is based on the funding formula, which I know that you're all really aware that I'm lobbying very hard to get changed so we get a greater share. The level of funding that Notts Police receives will determine how well we're able to deliver on the issues that matter to the community most. When I'm out and about, public are always telling me that visible policing and police officers' numbers are one of the key issues. And actually, our engagement and consultation really shows the strength of feeling around this. Working with the Chief Constable, they've done a really thorough demand review and looking at how to reallocate PCs and some more sergeants into neighbourhood policing roles. The consultation did highlight that many people have been struggling with the cost of living, but despite that, the majority did support a modest increase to the precept. It's always difficult to get the balance right, As staffing costs make about 2/3 of all Nottinghamshire Police's expenditure, but through some very good, prudent efficiency savings, and some additional government grants and a modest increase in the council tax precept, we can safeguard those high police numbers that people want to see in their neighbourhoods. The force is looking to redeploy more officers into those high visibility neighbourhood policing roles, and these budget plans mean that the resources remain in place to do that. I'm now going to pass over to my amazing Chief Finance Officer, Gillian.
Oh, wow. Lots to live up to there. So if we take the next slide, which has got the draft income and the
Can you put your
draft expenditure set out. On the left hand side, do you want to just go back one, please? Thank you. On the left hand side is the draft income. So if we start at the top there with the core police grant, up now at 163.2 million. That's an increase of 3.3 million on last year. The legacy council tax grants have remained static at 9.7 million. The pensions grant, that has increased from 2 million to 6.9, mainly to do with increased employers' contributions. The ring-fenced PUP, which is the police officer uplift programme, has increased to 9 million, and that's an increase of 4.9 million since last year. 7.6 million of that 9 relates to the original uplift target that Nottinghamshire had, which was 2378 headcount police officers, and then there's an extra 1.4 million included there for 30 temporary additional officers in the coming year. Both of those amounts will be dependent on meeting the criteria for those ring-fenced amounts to be payable. It's not automatic. Then if you move down to the special grant, that's a new line included this year that wasn't there previously, and that's specifically to do with the Op Perth maternity investigation. We've highlighted to the Home Office via a very detailed business case what the cost is likely to be, and they've indicated that it would meet the criteria for receiving a special grant. However, we're not clear on exactly how much, so we've assumed a sensible 65% of it coming into a special grant, and we'll come on to the rest of it when I get to the reserves line. Surplus on collection funds, at the time we had to do the presentation to yourselves and draw the line under the tables and the numbers to meet the paper deadline, and we'd put in 800,000 there. It's now up at 940k, so there will be a bit extra to go in there in the final iteration of the budget when it's approved. And then the police precept there is included at 1296, and including all the tax base information that we'd received at that point in time. So that gives the core funding total of 286.4 million. And then obviously there's a line there, use of reserves. We've got 3.3 million included. 1.1 of that is to do with the balance of the Op Perth. So the 2 million from the special grant and 1.1 use of reserves if we don't get full amount of funding from the Home Office, but it's kind of our best assumption at this stage based on what they've told us. So then moving over to the draft expenditure side, as you'll see, the top half there is the OPCC. So we've got the grants and commissioning budget at the top, 12.2 million, less the specific income, because we're all well aware that we get a significant amount of grants and income in that area, so that reduces it down to 4.1, and then the PCC office itself and the democratic call at 2.8 million. Excuse me. So a total OPCC of 6.9 million. Then moving on to the largest proportion of the budget, as you would expect, the budget requirement for the Chief Constable that will be delegated is 309.9. Again, the specific income that comes in to the Chief, so you take that off. And also you'll note that the allocated savings of 5.2 million are already built in, which is why you won't see a budget gap as such when we come to tables later in the papers. So the total Chief Constable budget is 280.7. We've got no direct revenue funding of capital in the budget at the moment. We had quite a significant reduction last year, and this has gone down to zero planned for the coming year. However, we will always reconsider that in year if any opportunity presents itself, because it does have an impact in future years if we can reduce the amount of borrowing that we do. So we will always consider that. And then lastly, not least, the joint service is the finance department, because obviously it provides services under statute to both the Chief Constable and the Commissioner. And then it comes to the 289.7 million in line with income. Go to the next slide, please. So within that, there are some £35 million of pressures. They were identified during the budget review with all the budget holders. As you'll be aware, the vast majority of the budget is staff related, and therefore having 25 million of those pressures related to staff in pay awards, increments, restructures and the pension changes is unsurprising. They've got another £3 million in contract and insurance price increases, and 2 million built in relating to inflation. There's 2 million of demand and performance improvements shown as growth in the budget for 24-25, and 3 million that I talked about earlier for the additional costs we're expecting to meet the Op Perth, again met by grant funding and use of reserves as our current planning assumption. Then in the savings, I mentioned that on the previous slide, that we built in 5.2 million already in the bottom line. 2 million of that is relating to just redesign of service, removal of temporary posts, ending of fixed term contracts, just being very aware and controlling on those areas that can reduce expenditure. 2.5 million has been identified in investment income. I think this year, you'll know, when we've done the budget monitoring, we've been exceeding the budget that we set in that area, so we've tried to be a bit more realistic and set a budget in line with what we think, albeit that will have to be reduced down in future years, because obviously they're not going to stay high interest rates forever. And then 0.7 just arising through various savings on premises, communications, computing, supplies, services and income. And I'll hand you back to the Commissioner to talk about the consultation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gillian. I committed last year to do a really thorough public consultation, and this is the biggest public consultation that's ever been done in Nottinghamshire. In fact, I don't know another police and crime commissioner who's gone out to as many people as I have. So we've done it in 4 different ways. The biggest chunk, over 4,000 people, was through our police and crime survey. So that's door knocking, asking the questions as part of the quarterly police and crime survey. And you can see there 53% of those asked were supported. Focus groups was that was 40 people, and they had chance to ask more questions, and they were 78% supportive. Local area pop-ups, that tended to be in supermarkets. We had stands in different supermarkets all over the city and county, and 70% of the people there were supportive of a moderate increase. And also we did a online poll which was open for quite a while, and we got 82% of people who were supporting on that, and that was out of 659 people. So I am listening to what the public want, and they want a strong police force that's funded well. So that's why I come to you with the proposed precept increase of £12.94 on a Band D property. If we just go to the next slide, please. 96. 2 pence out, sorry. We have got a victory. Thank you, Councillor Boyd. Yeah. So as you can see there, it's £12.96 on a Band D property, but be really aware that most of the properties are actually tend to be Band A or Band D. So no, I'm really aware that we're asking for more money, but that will mean that we'll be able to police people and keep them safe. So I'm very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for both the presentation by your member of staff and also your comments. As you appreciate, some of these figures are quite bemusing. If you've been working with them for several weeks, as I'm sure you have, you've got all the fingers on the button. But for us, we will have to just revisit one or two questions, I think. Perhaps I could just ask the question to you, Commissioner. You've got the sort of go ahead, if you like, to increase from £10 to £12.96. And I just wondered, what expectations can the general public expect to see if they're paying this additional amount of money? You've given us some responses for some things that are technical or behind the scenes, as it were, for funding, but what will the general public see?
The difference between the £10 and the £12.96 actually makes £700,000 difference. That was based on the modelling that we did. The original modelling was actually based on a slightly higher tax base, or council tax base of 1.5. When we got the numbers in, it was 1.2. But so that £700,000 means less use of reserves, and that will be able to get a balanced budget.
Thank you. I think Councillor Woodings wanted to come in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow up on your response to our question number 7 within the budget questions, because it's quite clear from the public consultation that there were many respondents who said, I don't mind paying the extra, but I want to see more police presence in my area. And I think we've got some details of the boosting of neighbourhood police constables, which is, there's a really strong theme that that's what people want to see. They want to see the police in their area actively dealing with their very local issues. First of all, can you explain exactly how many additional neighbourhood policing numbers there are going to be? I will come on to it in the performance report, but I know that Project Reacher, which has been very, very successful in my area, is being folded up and I understand folded into neighbourhood policing. So how does that increase the numbers there? And you've mentioned additional officers to deal with antisocial behaviour, covering a number of areas. How many additional officers will we see in there? And I'm very pleased about the extra numbers for cybercrime and fraud, because I think we just see the tip of the iceberg of that. But I'm also concerned about the point further on. I think it's the answer to question 10, which talks about the increasing in numbers based on the police uplift grant. That for this year, we'll be getting an extra 50 officers for the region. So can I ask, what is the medium, obviously we're going to get additional numbers to neighbourhood policing for this year, but what is the medium term commitment to neighbourhood policing? And can we have some, I appreciate it's an operational thing, but neighbourhood policing doesn't work unless you have the same officers in the same locality for, a good period of time. And previously, officers just moved round or taken away to urgent matters a lot, and they don't really get into their local community neighbourhood properly before they're moved to somewhere else. So I'm very interested in the numbers, please, but also in the genuine commitment to neighbourhood policing and police who really, really know the areas that they're actually working in. And the key people that are in that locality as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Woodings. I'm completely on the same page with you with the importance of neighbourhood policing, and it was really loud and clear with the process evolution and the demand review that the chief organised, that there was a need for stronger neighbourhood policing, more officers, both in the beat teams and also in response. And I've got some numbers for you. So previously, neighbourhood PCs, we had 184. Subject to this budget approval, we're looking at 256. Response police constables, previously there was 485, and you'll see in the papers that will be boosted to 590. Also, in response to the fact that we have quite a few officers who are young in service, there's going to be more supervision, and we've got the response sergeants currently is 75. That will go up to 85. So previously the supervisory ratio was 1.6. The average now is 1.7. You asked about Project Reacher. I am assured from the Chief Constable that the excellent work of Project Reacher will continue, but it will be wrapped into the work that the neighbourhood teams do. And if I pass over to the Chief when I finish the rest of the questions, if that's okay, for to just give that assurance to you too. With regard to antisocial behaviour officers, from memory, I think it's 4. I think it says in the papers. I can't remember. I'm sorry. I think it's one per community safety partnership, I think. But I'll have to come back to you on that. And again, we have boosted the cybercrime and fraud. Question 10, you referred to the police uplift grant. We did take advantage of the fact that the Metropolitan Force had struggled to recruit, and there was a option for us to help meet the 20,000 target if we could get some officers in quickly, and we got paid really well for doing that. So we did do two decision records, one for temporary for 30 extra, and then another one for another 20. It's in the plan to keep the 30 as long as we get paid for them. So that's the number that you'll see on the table, just above headcount and FTE above 10. With regards to the neighbourhood policing officers moving around a lot, police do move around. You just get used to somebody being somewhere and they've got promoted and gone somewhere else. But one thing that I can reassure you with the new model, neighbourhood policing is going to be protected. So at the moment, if there's a big football match or a big scene, neighbourhood beat officers get abstracted. The Chief might want to say more about how the new model will protect the neighbourhood beat officers so they don't get abstracted. So you have a more visible, greater presence and the same officers on the patch, because you need to build those relationships, don't you? Chief Superintendent Sukesh Verma tells the story of Tug Wilson, where everybody knew who Tug Wilson was in the city, and he's got this idea that every area is going to get their own Tug. They're going to get their main person of contact. And if you look on the website now, you will see who the neighbourhood beat officers are. That is very transparent. Chief, would you like to come in just to talk about Operation Reacher? I bet you know any of the numbers that I don't.
Okay, thank you. So in relation to the numbers, and as promised to those of you that attended headquarters, I've got those figures for everybody broken down into each of your areas, so you can see that in terms of the number of response officers, number of neighbourhood officers and supervision levels. So that was a request, and I can supply that to you afterwards. Obviously also within the neighbourhood teams, and I think probably what helps a little bit more with consistency is around PCSOs. So we've got committed to the number of those, albeit we do acknowledge that recently with Uplift, we have seen quite a few PCSOs move through into policing, but we anticipate that will be less as we move forward. In terms of Operation Reacher, what we were trying to do is make sure that we've got that consistent neighbourhood offer across all the areas, across the force. And what we found with Reacher was it was inconsistent in areas exactly what it did, and at some areas it wasn't delivering against neighbourhood priorities, perhaps was delivering more against force priorities. And what we want our neighbourhood teams to do is around problem solving, prevention and enforcement, and I think probably Reacher was more just specialising in the enforcement. So what Reacher
being absorbed into the neighbourhood teams is it gives us ability to do that three-pronged approach to neighbourhood policing, which is really important. And as the Commissioner said, with that additional amount of numbers of officers within neighbourhoods, we are then, and we won't be able to do it immediately, we need to manage expectations, but we aspire that nobody in neighbourhoods will be extracted for nighttime economy or policing football matches or things like that, which will then again allow for that continuity. So we should have not only neighbourhood policing teams bigger, but more coverage over longer periods of time and more consistency. And obviously trying to then now, with the uplifts, and it's been articulated already, things should settle down a little bit, so there should be less movement and churn around the organisation.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Ellis and Councillor Taylor, I think, want to just come in on this question.
Thank you, Chair. Can you just give us those figures again, please, for neighbourhood policing and response? So I'm trying to write them down and didn't get them. No, can you just
Certainly. Neighbourhood PCs previously was 184, and the new number is 256. Response PCs previously 485, new number planned is 590. Response sergeants was previously 75, the new number is 85.
because I don't think that's the numbers that are in your reports. Just looking paragraph 7.
I think that the response PCs I think are in the report. I don't think we've got the neighbourhood PCs in the report.
I'm just looking at the paragraph 7.4 on page 28. It says increase the number of neighbourhood PCs to 590.
Yeah.
From 485.
Sorry, there's a mistake there because that's response PCs. Response PCs has gone from 485 to 590.
Thank you.
Councillor Taylor, you wanted to go on, thank you.
Thank you. I think I'd like to start by saying that clearly additional officers make a real difference. As part of a major campaign on ASB in Newark, we've seen a 41% reduction because additional officers were put into the town, and that was for a while. They were temporary, however. I'm a little bit concerned about the numbers that have just been given, because whilst they are extra officers in those roles, a lot of that is redeployment from other roles. So then I don't want the public thinking we're going to have lots of extra officers. They're being redeployed, is my understanding. For example, I've been led to believe that there will be one extra officer in Newark and Sherwood. So it's not this massive thing. Great, we're getting lots of new officers, because it's not quite right. But I'm really pleased with the 41% reduction in that one ward, the town centre. Moving on though, there's a lot of people that are really struggling, and you mentioned the cost of living crisis. And we are totally committed to a really solid police force that is effective and delivering for the people of Nottinghamshire. And I think we're all totally committed to that. And we're committed to neighbourhood policing in a real sense, where they're there long term and can really start to deliver. However, some people cannot afford this extra. And I would like to challenge you, Commissioner, to finding the difference between the £10 and the £12.96, is it? 94, 96. I'd like to challenge you to use some of the high reserves that you have in the budget, higher than is needed, if now is not the time to use those reserves, some of those reserves, to tackle or to make it more affordable, then when is the time to use those reserves? We really need to be thinking about the people. I will end up supporting your proposition. However, my challenge is to you to show you care about those that can't afford it. And you said it was about 700,000 that would be needed to go back down to the modelled £10. Without a doubt, if you look at your reserves, you can afford it. I challenge you to do that today and to agree to it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. Thank you for your commitment and support for neighbourhood policing too. This is a redeployment of officers, but you will be seeing more officers in Newark because they won't be being abstracted. So there will be a big difference. And the Newark figures, response PCs, currently you've got 25, it will be up to 30 for Newark and Sherwood, and for neighbourhood PCs, currently 16, will be up to 22. I take your point about the difference between the £10 and the £12.96. And I did consider it really hard because we do have reserves, but my CFO says our reserves are at an appropriate level. The thing is, we know we've got some really tough times going. We have this big funding cliff in 2025 when a lot of the funding that we have, we know currently the plans are finishing. And it would have been really popular for me to either freeze the council tax and use all my reserves, or do a lesser council tax, for example, £10. But it wouldn't have been the responsible thing to do because we can never get that money back. This is £700,000 this year, but it's every year from then on that you don't get that back either because it builds and builds. So I'm being really sensible. I've only got those reserves to use once. We know we've got a funding absolute cliff edge coming in March 2025. And also, I've been really successful about bidding and getting extra money from the government because I've maxed out my precept. If I don't max out my precept, it's really hard for me to go to the government. And we've got Op Perth, which we know is going to be really expensive for us. This is the maternity inquiry. And I'm going to be begging for a special grant on that because we cannot afford it as it is. We need so much work, so many detectives to work with those 1,700 families. I cannot go to them and say, I need your help. I've maxed out as much as I've got if I haven't. So by asking the public for that little bit more, actually I'll be getting a lot more hopefully from government on a special grant. I'm just trying to be as responsible as I can be. It would be really popular not to do it. I'd love to have not asked because I get the fact that people are struggling for money, but actually we've got to deliver for our community, and I've got to make a balanced budget. And you've only got the reserves ones.
Thank you. Did you want to come back at all?
Yes, please. It's just that you might be talking about cliff edges, etc. A lot of people are hanging by the fingernails, and it might sound only £2 or £3 to you and I, and to most of us in this room. There are people out there that £2 or £3 is the difference between hanging on to the cliff edge or falling off. And this year of any year, I would still urge you to put those people first and give them a chance. The thing is, it's not just this authority that is raising council tax. The government have slashed central funding to local government, to the police, you name it, they cut it and transferred it to the local people through local taxation. And I think, seeing as we're in this building today, the leader of this council was actually turned around and said, there's no point in national government giving a £100 tax cut if all that means is we give a £150 tax increase at a local level. So I'm just urging you, it may only be £2 or £3 to us, but to a lot of people, it's a lot more.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott, thank you. Did you want to ask a question?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, and it's been really thought-provoking, everything that's come already. We'll ask my question. Is there a risk that if the council tax is not increased by a certain sum, that it will affect the grant funding the force will receive?
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. I think the special grant is a situation where we know we've not asked for a special grant for many years actually, but because of the op Perth, we're going to have to ask for a special grant. I do think we jeopardise that if we don't max out our funding opportunity. And actually, this year we've had the most generous financial police settlement we've ever had, but our costs have gone up too. So we're all feeling the pinch as our policing.
Did you want to come back, Councillor?
I will just come back with a comment that I've been in this council for some 12 years now, and we saw it as a county council with Operation X, with the child sexual exploitation inquiry, where I was on the children and young people, and I know that Philip Owen, the councillor at the time there, what he had to go through and to explain. We had a £6-7 million overspend that year on children's, and this, if we'd seen that coming, then maybe our council tax we would have compensated for that. And I can see exactly where you're coming from, and I'm totally supportive of your what you have to do. I think what the police are doing, and we've got to put that council, got to put your precept up to cover what the council is likely on, and you as a police force is likely to encounter in the next year or so, because we've experienced it as a county council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Inglis, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just going back to your neighbourhood policing figures. I'm pleased to see there's an increase in officers coming, whether they're a balance from reach or not, we don't know. Can I just ask for the PSSO figures within those, because obviously they're sort of key to neighbourhood policing.
Councillor Inglis, I haven't got them per area, but our commitment is to have 150 PCSOs. We're slightly down on that at the moment because some of them have become police officers, but the ambition is to keep at 150 PCSOs, which I'm delighted we can do if we get this budget. Sadly, our neighbourhood force of Lincolnshire have had to get rid of the majority of their PCSOs because they can't afford to keep them. And I think PCSOs are absolutely vital. I was speaking with one of our PCSOs, Paula Hipkiss. You know Paula from Beeston Way. She's actually just moved to the university, but the engagement she's doing is fantastic, and they're really, really valuable. Our PCSOs.
Okay, thanks. What are the current figures on PCSOs for?
Dan, do you have the current figure?
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Just within that question, question 7. Just it is important that we've got the officers on the street to deal with things. We've got the mention of the control room 999 101 calls, which I say when I've used it, it's been very good, excellent. I had calls to phone 3 9s last week for a live crime that's happening. But I was saddened to hear that there was no officer to attend it. So that's what we need on the street. We need the officers there to deal with the jobs that are coming in, not just to take calls.
So, sorry, did you say you called 999 and you were told there was no officer to attend it? Okay, if that's quite an operation, but could I take details of that afterwards, if that's okay, Rob? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson, did you want to come in? A similar question that was asked earlier.
It was on question 5 because I would like to ask the Chief Constable. He said about the service levels to be maintained and improved for the people of Nottinghamshire. But could you just give me clarification of what they are, please?
What, in relation to Operation Reacher? So I don't understand what you're asking me, sorry, say again. I don't understand the question, so if you could just clarify.
Yeah, on question 5, it was talking about the budget and the decision based on the budget proposals put forward by yourself for service levels to be maintained and improved for the people of Nottinghamshire, but it doesn't say what they are.
Oh, that relates to the growth proposals that I put a bid in for to explain to the Commissioner. So there's a number of those which we've grouped into different areas. So, for example, there's things like introducing rapid video response within the control room. There's some work around some of our IT systems. There's some around increase in staff in terms of a crime registrar that's been identified by the HMIC that we need to do. So in all, there's probably about, just like I can't count them here off the top of my head, probably about 25 or 30 different things that we want to introduce that would enhance the service. That is that additional cost, the growth cost.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Mrs. Dalby next.
But I just want sort of further details. It's about the 50 extra staff that were agreed, and now it's gone down to 30. So I wondered what had happened to the 20. And beyond 24-25, you say if funding is continued, we will maintain figures. So what are the plans if the funding is not continued?
Sorry. Thank you. Sorry, my speaker's not working. So there was 2 tranches of opportunities to have extra officers. The first was for 30, the second was for 20. The 30 extra, the first 30, we've secured money to keep those definitely for the next year. And if we can get money, if we can get baseline, if we can get into our figures, I'd like to keep them for longer. The 20 wasn't given. We haven't got extra money for that, so they will be. They will because we always lose officers. We'll still carry on recruiting, but there will be a churn.
So are they included in the core funding then, the 20 that were on top of the 30? I don't know. How are we?
Yeah.
So you've got 20 officers that you're not getting funding for now.
We are for now, but not forever.
So yeah, we're getting continued funding for the 30, but the 20, as of the end of this financial year, they're not funded anymore. So we will be looking to drop those out of the numbers, as Commissioner references, with the natural churn. So the police officer uplift programme for Nottinghamshire gave them a target of 2378 headcount officers, and that was the target. Obviously, some forces were more successful in achieving that target than others, so some forces were given the opportunity to take on some extras temporarily so that nationally the numbers could be reached. But it was always the case that Nottinghamshire were never actually allocated more than the 2378. But previous Chief Constable, current Chief Constable and the Commissioner were always very keen, as soon as any opportunity came, to take on a temporary additional officers, and they were really clear in decisions that were published that they were temporary, because what that does is actually gets people employed as police officers sooner than the natural recruitment cycle would have allowed. So it brings a positive benefit to Nottinghamshire, even though they are temporary increase in numbers, but the sustainable budget does always meet the 2378 that the uplift programme was all about.
But in practical terms, those people are still here, and it's just natural wastage. It just goes into different funding streams. Is that right?
They're still, because it's quite difficult, because you've always got to aim higher almost a little bit to make sure you hit the target, because obviously they're going to monitor the target in terms of giving you that ring-fenced allocation of grant. So you'll see, and I know it's been a talking point previously, where we've always looked like we've maybe been a little bit high but that's to ensure against dropping below, because we would lose money if we drop below those targets. But yes, as with any workforce plan, you're always making an estimate of people who are going to leave, retire, or the churn. So we do our best, and that's what that table is trying to set out, is the assumptions that we make to try and make sure we meet those targets, but also tail off to a sustainable funded level when we need to.
Thank you.
And Council English is 146 current number of PCSOs. They're just under the 150.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Ellis who wants to come in, I think, on the same topic.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the police officer numbers are a slippery creature the best of times, aren't they? Just want to make sure I understand. So, although in the report you're talking about increasing the number of response officers and neighbourhood officers, they are redeployments. They're rejigger. They're not extra. We're not getting any extra officers out of this budget. And on the useful table that you provided in response, if I read it right, April 2024, the headcount will be 2,446, and at the end of March 2025, you're expecting 2,413. So over the year, you're expecting a reduction of 30 police officers. Do I understand that right? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Abrahams. Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for the visit to the headquarters, and I really agree with the direction, neighbourhood policing, and all the objectives you're trying to achieve. But I am going to return to this idea that central government is transferring the burden onto local people. The point's been made before, but I think it's important to, when you think what we've had over the last 2 years, double figure inflation, energy prices, everything like that, and then the mortgage that's about those changes that are still feeding in. So this cost of living crisis is not over, and the residents from my area, they're fully supportive of additional police. It's very important to them, but they didn't vote in my area for that extra precept. But it's the bigger principle for me. You can't always keep saying that if we don't do the maximum, we're going to get disadvantaged in future by central government, because what you're actually doing is exacerbating the argument where local people are always going to have to pay for the ambition of improving the police force, which we all want. So I return to this point, if there's ever been a time to make the difference between the £10 and the £12.96, it should come out of the reserves, because in our lifetimes we've never had a collection of circumstances that's led to a cost of living crisis, what we've been enduring now for 4 years. And again, the ambition to build up the force, community police, it has come from a 10 or 13 year legacy of funding disappearing. So that is a contributory factor. So my appeal is, on this one occasion, that we use the reserves to get that extra aspiration that you've set out from £10 to £12.96 from the reserves.
You make some really strong points, Mayor Abrahams, but I I did think really, really hard about using my reserves, but they're only there once, and actually, I've got to be really responsible. I can't use that money now, knowing that we've got some really tough times coming with this with the funding cliff of March 2025, when millions and millions of pounds of my commissioning budget is not guaranteed from there, and that's things for victim support, and which I'm desperate. The IDVAs, Independent Domestic Violence Advisors, the ISVAs, Independent Sexual Violence Advisors, all that funding currently I've got no guarantee. after March 2025, and also my violence reduction partnership. Again, all of that, I've got no guarantee where that money is going to be coming from then. So I have to be really responsible and keep some money. And my CFO is happy that our reserves aren't too big. They're with where they should be, but it's a difficult decision, and I could have been really popular and froze it or not asked for it, but it will make a difference to whether I can get extra funding too. I've got to be sensible here. And actually, there's something about whether we get the money from government or whether we get the money from local. It's the government doesn't have its own money, so it's all paid for by the public from taxes, isn't it? You know, and actually, I think the government is trying to devolve power more locally, and you know, and people, and I've listened to local people, and what's you know, there wasn't, you know, overall of Nottinghamshire, Nottingham City, no, there was an overwhelming yes, they were happy to pay more for Nottinghamshire policing, to be where it needs to be. So I'm trying to be, make the local decision based on the local needs.
Want to come back, Mary?
Yeah, because I sort of accept what you say, but I don't accept what you say, because it's almost like sort of blackmail's not quite the right word, but if I don't put it up to the highest mountain now, all these other things that are really valuable that you're saying we won't get funding for in the future, well, I don't think that is a sound basis for saying that we must always put up it to the highest amount, and I've had to balance my budget. I've had to look at my reserves, and we've had to take them towards the minimum reserves. We're trying to be responsible too, but we've all personally taken cuts to balance the budget. We're trying to share the burden to show that the people that we are doing our very best to find the balance between sustaining services and looking after people during this time. And so in some respects, I repeat, there has never been a more appropriate time to look at those reserves, and I'd urge you to look towards those.
Yeah, so when we've been looking at the budget build-up process, we have actually looked at the reserves in some detail, and the cumulative efficiencies required in the medium-term financial plan are 19.7 million. Now, whilst there are some explanation of how those efficiencies could be met across the medium term, we do have to bear in mind that there's a risk there that they could maybe not be delivered, or not to that extent, or that other pressures come in, which means they get worse rather than stay as we're currently forecasting. So it's that balance between keeping enough reserve for if your plans to meet efficiencies don't turn out as expected, but there's also something about some of these reserves have been specifically earmarked and put aside for some very real issues that we're facing. And the one that the Commissioners mentioned at March 25, when 3-year settlement funding period ends and some significant amounts of really vital services have no funding set aside for them. So 6 million of the reserves at the moment are specifically put aside for that purpose, and that's not going to be not able to be used in 1 year even. So we're going to be doing a lot of planning to look at how we phase, because we can't just keep stuff going if there's no money to do it. So that 6 million might have to last a little while. We might have to decide what things are ending and come up with an exit plan, and that reserve would see us through that period. There's other ones in there. There's nearly £2 million that we've put aside because of the temporary 50 officers that we were getting. The timing of that funding when it comes in compared to when the officers start means that actually your pressure is in the next year. So 2 million of the reserve straight away will be used in 24-25 funding the officers until we tail it back down to that sustainable officer level. So quite a few of the reserves have got a really specific, as they should have, earmarked reserves should be really specific. And the ones that are left are sort of quite small in number, but nevertheless, they will get a thorough challenge and review as we finalise the reserve strategy, because we want to make sure whether any of those could actually go into future planning for those efficiencies and the gaps in the budget that are emerging.
Is it correct? There's 24 million in the earmarked reserves, then, and you've even that what you've come to there is like 8 million, and then a few more. That's why I'm pressing it, because of 24 million, and you've mentioned maybe up to 10 million for specific earmarks. It still leaves quite a.
Yeah.
Are we looking at £700,000 we're talking about?
I think the point the Commissioner was making is if you take, yes, 700,000 doesn't look much in the scheme of those reserves, but it's the fact that it rolls on year after year.
I understand that, because that's happened, obviously, every time we make a decision.
And there's a very specific earmark reserve again for medium-term financial plan, but the plan as it stands at the moment, that will be consumed across the medium-term financial plan. So that's at 3.1 million, forecast to be 4.8, because we're putting more into it, because we can see the gaps that are going to emerge, and we're going to need that to smooth the effect of any budget shortfalls that become a reality as we move through the medium term.
So that's really useful information. I still only got to about 15 million there. We seem to have covered a lot, but anyway, that's why I'm labouring the point. Anyway, 700k during the cost of living crisis as a one-off, I think it would be the right balance. We're still doing a precept of £10, and it's the difference between that and £12.96, and it still looks as if there's about 9 million in those earmarked reserves. Well, only from the figures you've given, that's why I'm pressing, that's all.
I mean, there are others. We could keep going through the list if you wanted, because there's another 2 million in insurance, which, following an actuarial review, identified that we didn't have enough in our insurance provision and our insurance reserve. So 2 million of that, we can keep going through it all, but they do get a thorough review, and they're earmarked for a purpose, and if they're able to be used, we bring them into the plan and the budget setting, which is what is obviously set out in the budget papers.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So we did cover this the other week, and just for a point of clarity, there's so many pots that are ring fenced. Was it 7 pots, or maybe more? But they are ring fenced and can only be used for certain things. So they can't all be brought into this budget, can they? So it's just they're earmarked. Money's there, but can't be used. So
I think
that's what the £2 million there is.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you. And we've got, I'm just going to check, Councillor Woodings and Councillor Taylor. Can I just check that you both want to come in on this particular topic? So Councillor Woodings was first, and then Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know whether my notes are wrong, but I thought that of the 9 million of general reserves, I'd written down that 3 million of that is needed to pay for the uplift in policing numbers, and then you don't get that additional funding for the policing numbers until when? Towards the end of the financial year. But the general reserves are unearmarked, aren't they? But I thought we were talking about the grant funding that can only be used for specific grant items, which are just presumably just being held just to pay for those things. But would they form part of earmarked reserves that can't be actually used for anything else? Is that correct? I mean, when having a look at the actual report, we've got about 5 paragraphs on this, and I wonder if in future it'd be really good to have a good understanding of the reserves situation.
Thank you, Councillor. Can we pick up Councillor Taylor's comments and then you?
Thank you. 700k out of the size of the reserves that we're having a problem we're discussing is peanuts compared to the effect it's having on individuals. It can be achieved. But I was quite stunned when I heard a message come from your Commissioner that there were 3 pots, the violence protection, and I can't remember what the actual, but very important projects that you're saying this government is about to defund. So that leaving Nottinghamshire without those 3 things, because I think the public need to know that this government is potentially going to stop funding 3 vital services. And as a result of that, you're not willing to use 700k to help protect people, because those 3 pots of money could disappear. Thank you.
Want to come back, Commissioner?
So going back to some of the points, there's a real mixed bag. So some of the things that are put in an earmark reserve are because we've had specific funding come in and there's a timing issue between when it's come in and when it's going to be spent. So there'll be some lines in the earmark reserves that are specifically that. Certainly some of the revenue grants and the temporary PC uplift are definitely to do with that. The general reserve is more a risk-based, so we look at a whole host of what could happen and we do a minimum and a maximum effect. And at the moment our reserve strategy is to go with kind of the midpoint of that, so that it's not excessive and it's certainly not over the 5% holding a general reserve that's recommended, but it's not too low either, because obviously if something awful was to happen that needed an awful lot of resource, we have to have that in place to call upon it. What was it? Was that the 2 main points? You say? Yeah. I think the session that we had in the workshop on the budget generally, obviously, yeah, I think we need to maybe make that a bit longer going forward if we can stand it, because I know it's quite a heavy session, and certainly put a bit in there that's specifically going through some of these reserves and to help with an understanding on what some of them are and what they're held for.
Thank you very much. Anyone else want to come in on this topic? Oh, no, not on this topic. Okay, thank you for that. Sorry. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, just a small question. What's a PCC reserve? What's that in there for?
So that's a specific reserve that's held for any cost of an election or referendum should a PCC choose to propose a precept higher than the referendum threshold.
So there's £1 million put set aside for that.
I don't think everyone heard the answer because I think different microphones are on. Did you hear the answer? Councillor Mohammed, to come in on the same topic.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Just following on from Councillor Taylor's comment, it was a point of clarification. So the rationale for not using the reserves is that the Commissioner feels like there is a real risk that in 2025 the special grants that she has historically received for some amazing projects, which the city we've been working very closely on with the voluntary sector and delivering, could potentially be lost. And plus, to get any further special funding in the future, it is predicated by raising the precept as high as possible. Is that what your rationale was on the explanation?
No, politically it's going to be an interesting year this year. We could have a different, we don't know what the government's going to be when it's time to be setting the next spending review. And there is a risk that we don't know what's going to be happening with these massive grants that we get really essential services, and we have a cliff edge in March 2025. So I do want to make sure we've got enough reserves to soften if anything drastic happens. And actually, it does make my case stronger when I'm asking for more money, and I've been successfully getting millions and millions of pounds extra money if I'm maxing out my precept. It does make a stronger case.
Did you want to come back, Councillor? Are you happy with your answer? Thank you. I've got Councillor Wilmot. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I first of all say, before I start, working with the police, it's been a pleasure. It really has. As over the last few weeks, I've been put in charge of our community safety team, and we're working really well with that situation. But the thing is, and I'd like to thank the Police and Crime Commissioner for presenting her final budget report to us. But I would like to make it very clear that the report that you put to us said that Ashfield and Mansfield were two areas that the people said there should be no precept. It was quite clear. It wasn't just 51%. It was more than that. So it was a serious situation, and I've also not wanting to make my decision personal. I've asked all the other councillors in the council, and they very much told me what that they feel, and it's clear that, as I say, they all feel, the people, the residents, the councillors, that we feel that the rise is too much. The reasons for the rise, of why it's been too much, is the fact that because of the cost of living crisis. I'm one of those councillors that loves walking the streets and talking to people. I do that regularly, and I do it with the officers that I've got to make sure that we get to know what the people think, because that's very important of what the people out there think in your area, and you know, I'm really saying we've got to make sure that we get to know what people want. As I say, it's very difficult to support a precept when the cost of living crisis is such a crisis as it is. Also, with the reserves that you've got to help with this crisis for 1 year, I think it wouldn't hurt you very much at all. And of course, the second big item was that what the people said, they thought there's a lack of community policing. Well, I'm going to be working with the police on that, as I told you at the meeting a fortnight ago, that we can do something about it, and we're going to do something about it, because it's essential, the residents, because once you get the residents on your side, what they do, they tell you exactly what on some of the incidents that's happening. Normally, they won't tell you because they don't see anybody. But on that situation, as I say, and just to talk about the neighbourhood policing PCs, 590 from 485. Yes, I agree. That's fantastic. But you've not put in how many retirements you're going to be against you. You've not put in the leave people, the natural wastage, and the people leaving the service, which I know is quite a few. And you know, if you put that into this report, that would have been a big help to a lot of us. As the Commissioner knows, at Ashfield District Council, we value community protection. That's why we spend many hundreds of thousands of pounds on it at the present time. And why do we spend that? Because the community asks us to do it, and that's why we do it. And as I say, I'm now the new lead on that for the new portfolio holder. Money that we don't need to spend, but chose to, and residents value it. They really value help against crime, because I don't know what it is, but certain crimes seem to be rising, and certain other ones we're managing well. The police are managing well, but we have to look at what the residents say to us more and more and more. As I say, that's why in May, as I say, we returned so many councillors to Ashfield, because we find out what the people think, and they know that. In your report, it states in paragraph 2.3, the government remains committed to ensuring the police are properly funded without placing an excessive burden on local taxpayers. Unfortunately, this rise in council tax does exactly that. Whether we like it or not, it does exactly that. Because as I'm walking the streets, people tell me they can't afford this, they can't afford that, they can't afford the other. And at the moment, they're on the top of a hill, and it won't take very much to throw them over that hill. And we've got to try and help as much as we can. Hopefully that this cost of living crisis will subside, and next year you'll be able to put a good precept in. But as I say, at the moment, a precept is not the way forward at this moment. Not on its own, admittedly, but through community of risers. Only last week, Nottinghamshire County Council announced a planned rise of close to £85 on an average bandy council taxpayer. That means with the police and the council, the council tax will rise close to £100, and that's we feel is unacceptable, and that's why that's before borough and district councils make their and the fire authority make their rises or put it forward. I had a look at the results of your consultation, and it's no surprise to see the highest amount of Ashfield and Mansfield residents say no to any rise in council tax. Yes, they blame the cost of living, but also blame the lack of visible policing and their experience of the service. But we're going to do something about that. In Hucknall, we've seen our police station in Watwell Road disappear. Yes, it was done a few years ago, and as I say, but it's remained derelict for many years. It's actually remained derelict.
I'm going to interrupt you slightly,
Yeah.
Councillor, if I may. If I could bring you back to actually some of the
I'm
things that you're
nearly at the
talking
end
about.
of it
Oh, you
now.
need it, yeah, because
I'm
it's
nearly at the end
about
of it, thank goodness.
council house taxes and things like that. We're in the wrong venue. We need to concentrate on feeding things to the Commissioner about the Commissioner's precept budget.
Yes, but unfortunately, the money that came from the sale of that land, the Commissioner at that time didn't put anything extra into Hucknall's policing, even though we lost the police station. So anyway, as I say, it's a very difficult situation, but I'm afraid I can't support a rise in the precept this time. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to check, Commissioner, because I noticed I've got Councillor Cullen and Mrs. Dolby. I just want to check, is it in relation to the same issues raised by yours? Is yours, Councillor Cullen, or no? Oh, let me take Mrs. Dolby's then, because it's, I think, following on from this one.
Sorry, I'm coming back to the question I asked, having thought about it. What would be the risk of reducing the PCC reserve from 1 million to 300,000?
Just before I answer that, can I just? I'm a bit concerned at the interpretation of the 700k. So, when we did the medium-term financial plan for the year 24-25, we were assuming a £10 increase on the precept, multiplied by a tax base that we were assuming would increase by 1.5%. That was in our modelling. Then we found out the tax base was lower than our estimation. So the impact of moving to 1296 with a lower tax base was a 700k impact on our model. if you do the £2.96 in isolation, multiplied by the now known lower tax base, it's £1 million. So I just want to make that point, that the actual standalone calculation is £1 million. The 700k was the impact on our model compared to what we were already modelling in the MTFP, just for a point of accuracy. So it would be the entire, to revert to your question, it would be, should we get rid of that whole reserve to fund the £1 million that wouldn't be achieved? It's a risk because us as officers have to make sure there is provision in a budget for any decision that any commissioner at the time decides, and the cost of referendum, should it ever happen, is £1 million that's been calculated and tends to be held as quite a common cost of that exercise, because it happens, it's all the rebilling, it's all those costs associated with it if it were to be successful, even having run the costly exercise in the first place. So it's literally trying to safeguard an amount of money that could deal with that circumstance should it ever arise.
Thank you. Did you want to come back to Councillor Wilmot, Commissioner?
Just on a couple of points, if that's okay, Councillor Wilmot. Thank you for your enthusiasm and for getting so involved. The answers with regards to people retiring, that it actually is on the table with the head count. You can see people retiring, and you can see the new tranches of people coming in. So that's all in the calculations already. As you know, council the police precept council tax has to be for the whole of the city and Nottinghamshire. It can't be different for different areas. I wanted full transparency, which is why I've given you so much detail in the consultation, the precept consultation that we did. And I wanted to be really honest that actually, I know people in Ashfield and Mansfield are really struggling, and and I've been really honest about what people have said in those areas to know that the cost of living is their biggest challenge, and I'm absolutely aware of that. But you also talked about the importance of visible policing. They want visible policing. You talked about them wanting help against crime, and you talked about how they agree that you spend, the community asks you to spend money on community protection, and you do that as a council. So I'm just asking the same thing. I'm just asking for you to support me to make sure that we can do more visible policing, which is what your community say they want.
Thank you, Commissioner. I've got Mr. Vaughan Newton and Councillor Cullen.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, just a quick comment. I remember Tug Wilson very well. Yeah, I'm 6'2", and he made me feel like a pygmy. I think he was 6'10" from memory. And where are you going to find a cop of those proportions for every neighbourhood policing area? I take it that Chief Superintendent Verma was referring to his characteristics rather than his proportions. Okay. In the financial year we're talking about, the new one, you're hoping to achieve £5.2 million in efficiency savings. To give the panel confidence, please can you set out how you have performed against your efficiency targets in the last 3 years?
I know about the last two. I wasn't here for the one before. Are you okay to take this? We have always hit our efficiency targets, haven't we, Julia?
Likewise, I haven't been here for the entire 3 years, but yes, there is a very good track record in Nottinghamshire of delivering targets that are set out, not least because I think it's extremely impressive that they can actually set out at quite an early stage what the thinking is. Even into the medium term, they're already thinking of where those things could come from. And I know that there's a very rigorous process with budget holders where they are very clearly expected to think about all aspects of the budget, not just pressures, but to really think about areas where things have changed and savings and efficiencies can be driven out. So I'm confident of it. Last year's that were proposed were delivered, and I think question 15 in the pack as well also refers to the 3-year period, equating to 10.6 million being delivered over that period. So from my very relatively short life in Nottinghamshire in this role, I'm quite comfortable with what's being proposed. That it's deliverable.
Thank you.
Did you want to come back? No? Okay. Councillor Cullen, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. I'm just going to go back to this business of not being able to use the reserves. And the reason that you've given, as I understand it, that you need to, there's two parts. You need to safeguard reserves in case of the cliff wall of grants that's coming up in 2025, and that you need to ensure that that you use the whole precept in order to have a better chance of getting the funds, other funds. Now, Commissioner, you tell us in every single meeting how good you are at getting grants. You say it all the time. So, and as you know, I work in a world where I have to get grants all the time as well. Why have you lost confidence that you'll be able to get these grants in 2025 to replace the grants that are going to be lost? Surely already you've been, we know there'll be one government or another in 2025. Surely already you're having conversations about what funds are going to be available and will those grants be extended and what will replace them if they're not. And surely you're confident you'll be able to get those grants. So it should, I believe, be okay for you to be brave at this point and spend £1 million of reserves to save the extra. We're not talking about the whole precept, we're talking about the £2.96 on band D. In my experience of grants, which is extensive and upwards of 40 years, it's actually usual to be able to say we can't raise the whole amount, we can't charge people that can't afford it because of their particular circumstances. And the cost of living crisis is twice in my lifetime, I'd say, these circumstances, and I'm old, twice in my lifetime. Surely it's a time when we could say we can't charge local people extra in our deprived communities of Nottinghamshire for the extra two, surely. So that's what I'm going to say. Surely, I mean, either you've lost your confidence in getting grants or you're just not being brave enough.
I think that's. I've not lost my confidence. I've listened to my community, and overwhelmingly, they've told me they are happy. You know, more people have said they're happy to pay than aren't happy to pay. People know our community values quality policing. Our community wants more visible policing, and that is what this budget will help us achieve. I will keep saying I've been very good at getting money, and I will continue to be good at getting money. But that's because I've been able to say that I've maxed out my precepts, and it does make a difference when you're negotiating. And you know, overall, the community have said they support this. So I think I'm being really brave actually by doing the right thing, and actually not using my one-off reserves, which would be the easy thing to do. I'm trying to be brave and do the right thing and think long term for our communities to make sure they get the policing they need.
Did you want to come back, Councillor Cullen? Thank you. Councillor Introna, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Can I just ask one question for clarity? So we're talking about the £700,000. If we don't ask for the full precept, does that mean that, whether we like it or not, the mechanisms we have in place mean that it may be more difficult to get government grants? And if that's the case, and you talked about Operation Perth and finding the cost for that, for instance, does that mean if we don't ask for the maximum grant, we could actually be in a worse financial position than we might be if we do? So that's one question. The second one is we've heard a few numbers. I'm part of a county council that's recommending a council tax increase of 4.84%, which includes 2% on adult social care. I can't remember what number we heard from the other part of the chamber, but for the Band B, which is just under £1,500, that's a £72 a year increase, not 85 or 100 and something, whatever was mentioned. We also had that Mansfield and Ashfield didn't vote by a small margin. It was much more than 51%. It was 51.7% of those that said either yes or no said no. So I just hope it's people will give some correct figures when they're talking. The other one, which is a difficult one for all councils when they're setting budgets, is it's all right talking about cost of living, and we all sympathise with people that have the challenges, and we're all, as councillors, and those of us that work on as councillors and officers in councils, are doing our very best to try and manage services to support them. But it's one thing saying that we can't afford to raise the police precept by 4.8% because those most vulnerable people in society can't afford it, when we're part of councils that are raising tenants' rents by 7 and 7.7%, which are those people who are at, more often than not, at the most vulnerable end of the spectrum. And I just wonder how some people actually balance one statement about we can't afford this, but we can afford more when we're setting council tenants' rent rises. Thank you.
To your question, Councillor Introna, it will make it more difficult to get a special grant if I don't max out my precept.
Can I just check with colleagues? We've been giving you a hard time for an hour and a half. Can I just check any other final questions that people would like to raise on the budget? I've already got one hand up. Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else? I'll come to you first then.
Thank you. I'm going to question 32. Are you really telling us that you can't come up with a reserve strategy when a budget is being put together and raising a precept? Surely part of putting together a budget to raise a precept means that you prepare a proper reserves policy that should have been in this paper. Traditionally, my understanding is the reserves policy as process has been within the precept, and surely you should be able to have done it and should have done it. And can I have the Commissioner, please, that answers that?
I'm going to start and I'm going to hand over to technical questions for Gillian. Until we get the budget sorted, we can't do our full reserve policy. You do the budget first before you do the reserves.
So the two are looked at in tandem. When we put together the draft budget that we have to obviously present for this step in the process in order for the precept recommendation to come by yourselves, we will look at the key reserves that impact on the budget itself. So we will have looked at the one that's the tax base and MTFP. We will have looked at the general reserve as to whether we're still happy that that sits within the parameters that the current approved reserve strategy sets out. If there was anything looking like there would be a variation from that currently approved strategy, absolutely we would be raising it in these papers. It's a bit of a strange chicken and egg situation in that at the point we have to draw a line under the numbers to make sure we've got enough information for the presentation at the workshop and the papers that we submit for today. The council tax base and collection fund are still at the point of being finalised. We don't have the final settlement from the government at that point in time. We did get it last week, and obviously there's this key step about the precept, which is a major part of the budget build-up. So we've done the review of the reserves as far as we need to in building a draft budget. Once we know these final components, the settlement has now been confirmed. I've not seen any last minute changes to tax base and collection fund, and the outcome of today, we will then go back to creating a final budget which the Commissioner will have to approve by the end of February. and all the financial strategies, not just the reserve strategy, will be finalised at that point. So they're all in draft and they all very much work in tandem. And I do understand that you've had a draft version of that, but professionally I didn't feel very comfortable putting a reserve strategy out in the public domain that purports to be the strategy for next year, when actually there's quite a lot of unknown factors, really key factors that could impact on that. That said, as I said before, when we do the workshop next time around, I think there'd be merit in spending a bit more time in you understanding the thinking that we're going through alongside getting the papers ready for the session that you hold today. One thing I would say is the draft budget decision in the papers already sets out my section 151 statement on the robustness of the budget and the adequacy of reserves. So at the point the papers are produced, I have a view, and then when the final components are brought together, when we do the final budget, I will have another view that I will obviously recommend my view and thinking to the Commissioner in order that she can approve the budget. So I take that duty very seriously. I'm not going to put something in a paper that gives assurances if actually I have concerns, because I would be flagging up those concerns if I had them. So that would be the rationale.
Thank you. And I've got Councillor Taylor and then Councillor Wilmot want to come in.
Thank you. If you're producing a budget where you're putting roughly 3 million from reserves into the budget, but you say you can't put another 1 million in, you must have considered what your strategy is on the reserves already, and to have published it within this would have been sensible. Or how come you're in a position to say we can spend 3 million but not 4 from the reserves, when the difference between the 3 and the 4 is quite insignificant in the overall scheme of things? And that's why I'm saying that it should have been in this paper, because the biggest discussion point in this meeting has been about the reserves, yet there's no reserves policy. And I think that it is really detrimental to this debate that you haven't done that.
I think as I've already said, would probably be what I would say again, is that the current published reserve strategy is still valid. Our strategic approach to reserves hasn't changed. The general reserve parameters remain valid and we are within those parameters. And key reserves that we know will be needed across the budget and the medium-term financial plan, it's not just about what might be happening next year, were the key considerations when we produced the balance at the end of March 24, with a view to what we'd need in the medium term.
Thank you. Councillor Wilmot, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just point of I want to know about the vacancy factor. At present it's 3.50, and it's going up to 4.75. So you will have budgeted for that. But I'm told at the present time it's 9%. Where's that money going? The savings you're making on that? Thank you.
So the current level of vacancies that are being experienced in the current financial year will be presenting in the forecast underspend that we've been reporting to the panel throughout the year. And I think at the moment the last report you've seen was proposing that a vast majority of that underspend was going to be used for direct funding of the capital programme, with the specific impact that reduces the revenue pressure on the budget in future years because you're not taking out borrowing. There'll also be, in the assumptions for the reserves at March 24, the allocation of additional funding to the MTFP reserve will likely come from underspending in the current year, and that may well actually need to be earmarked again, if you like, for the Operation Perth shortfall that we're expecting in special grant. So it's it's reported on throughout the year, and we tend to put the current thinking. Obviously, we don't take any decisions because it's a forecast outturn at any one point in time, and things can change throughout the year. And I tend to put a little narrative in the paper to yourselves that sets out the current thinking on what those underspends would be used for.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Did you want to come back, Councillor? Thank you. Well, I think. Oh, sorry, Councillor Inglis. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just looking at the funding, I know we've thrashed out about reserves and everything. Just reading question 25. I know the Commissioner was quite keen on addressing the revised funding formula from government. And I see that's not been completed from your answer. In there, there's quite weak, really, like assumptions and suggestions. And it's always been felt that Nottinghamshire is underfunded with comparable to other forces of similar sizes. And you put a figure of 10 million in there. And then it just says there's going to be a review in the future. Can we put some clarification on that, please? Because obviously it's too late for this year, but then is that something that's going to impact on the next year's budget where we could get an extra funding that will alleviate any precept or anything?
Currently, Nottinghamshire is funded as a rural police force, and when you think about our urban city and metropolitan issues, and big universities, etc. There's a lot of busyness in the city, which I don't think we get fairly funded for. We haven't actually put the potential extra money in for the funding form until 26-27. And if you look, we put it potentially, very prudently, an extra £2 million in 2026-27. £4 million in 26, 27, 28, and £5 million in 28, 29. My understanding is that when the funding formula, new funding formula does come in, it's either going to happen. What's the word? Not slope it. What's the word?
Phase in.
That's the word. Phase it in. Yeah. So that's why there's prudent figures in the MTFP for that.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panel members, and thank you, Commissioner and your team, for responding to a lot of questions. It's now the time. Does anyone feel at the moment that they're able to propose? Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. I think with the two workshops and today we've crawled over the budget in great depth. I think we've heard that this is all part of a continuing strategy from the government to transfer costs from the national taxpayer to the local taxpayer, from a relatively progressive tax system to a more regressive system, which is unavoidable. We've also heard how the Commissioner is under pressure from the government to maximise the take on the precept, otherwise we'll be disadvantaged in future years. We discussed the cost of living, the effects of cost of living, and we've seen the consultation responses, which basically said overall the majority of people in the county are prepared to see an increase if they see an improvement in policing. So on the basis of that, I'm happy to move the recommendation that we support the proposed increase of £12.96.
Can we have a vote of hands up for those who are supporting that proposal, please? While my colleague counts them. Thank you. Those against? That's duly carried. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, colleagues. Do people need the breather, or are we happy to move on to the last couple of items? Yeah. Oh, thank you. Then I think this will be a fairly quick bit of work. Item 7, which is the Police and Crime Commissioner's Update Report. Thank you, Commissioner. Page 81 to 98. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Since this report was submitted, things have moved quite quickly with policing in Nottinghamshire. And as you're aware, there was the sentencing hero for Valdo Colacane. My deepest sympathies are with their families and all those who were the victims who were killed, and also the victims who were injured in that horrific senseless attack. I'm aware that the family have some concerns over how Nottinghamshire Police handled the case, and I take those concerns really seriously. It's my duty to scrutinise the force's performance, to make sure it provides the best possible service, and also to strive to make continuous improvements. I've therefore commissioned or in the process of commissioning, we're scoping it out at the moment, the College of Policing to come in and to do an independent learning review on Nottinghamshire Police's handling of the Valdo Colacane case. I've extended and reached out to the families who to make sure that their concerns can be included in the scope for that review. It's important that we get it right. I'm not going to rush this, but I just wanted to give you an update that is what is happening there. Obviously, I've spoken with my Chief Constable and she's welcomed this course of action. So if I just move on to a quick scoot through my update report, just a few things just to point out. 3.2, Safer Streets project is really pushing forward now. There's a good table in there where you can see the different interventions, the different areas, and it's lovely partnership working that we're doing with the councils. I'll just get my notes. I wanted to bring to your attention on 3.5, the detached youth work. I thought you'd be interested to hear that in Bilborough we have the 4Bs, Bulwell we have Evolve, Al Huraya are working in Sneinton, and they're doing some targeted engagement in the city. So far, in the last quarter, so 2,754 young people. And also in the city, the 4Bs are co-funded with the Violence Reduction Partnership, Nottingham BID, I think it's called This Is Nottingham Now, and Nottingham Forest Community Trust. They did some really good work a few months ago. I don't know if you saw it in the newspaper, there was something called Tie Wars happening in the city. It was a TikTok trend, and it led to a disorder in the market square involving 300 young people, and the 4Bs successfully worked to resolve the conflict, coordinated and worked really well with the police and provided support, and there's been no further incidents on that. Move on to 3.17, rural crime. I'm delighted to say the 4x4s have finally turned up. We're waiting for these forever. We've got 3 new 4x4s which are going out next week. Also done a diesel dye project. This is where I didn't realise some fuel on farmers' land is actually clear, and they're dyeing it blue, so they can see if it's been stolen. And also, particularly up in Bassetlaw, they've had some real issues with diesel thefts. So there's a real project going on up there. And the new we've got an officer now going out to do prevention advice with the rural crime, and we're doing target hardening. Dodds have got a contract to do that for us now. February, you're going to see loads about fraud, talking about police in the digital beat at 3.2. We've got a new fraud booklet, which people can have a hard copy of if they want, or a digital copy. And there's going to be lots of advertising to prevent people, to make people aware of how not to be scammed. On February the 14th, we're doing a big story about romance fraud it is a massive issue in Nottinghamshire. I was really shocked, and there's a really brave woman who's telling her story of how she basically she was playing games online and somebody started chatting with her. Long story, short, but ended up taking a lot of money off her. And she's been really brave in telling her story, so hopefully it can stop other people being scammed. Also in Nottinghamshire, there's the biggest fraud is cheque, plastic cards, and online banking. There were 1,478 offences in the last 12 months, and that's up 850 from the year above it. So, massive increase. So I'm working with Experian, who are doing some as part of the fraud partnership, and we're going to be doing some messaging around that and how people can keep safe. So please share any of the social media posts or any of the stuff we see about fraud to keep people safe. 3.21, it's the Immediate Justice Programme. I'm delighted that successfully launched in January. I met one of the chaps who was there. He told me his story. He'd been out at Christmas and had too much to drink and behaved out of character and did some criminal damage. He paid for the criminal damage, so to make things right. But rather than go through the long court process, he was able to come forward to do the immediate justice. So I met him at Arnott Hill Park. He was there doing some litter picking, and he was delighted that he hasn't got a criminal record now. He's done some reparative work. He's made good to his community. He's learned a lesson, and actually, it was a really quick resolution. And there's lots of stories of how immediate justice can make a real difference. So the type of crime categories which are suitable for immediate justice are criminal damage, possession of drug offences, public order offences, also non-crime categories such as fly tipping, litter, domestic noise nuisance, off-road bikes, e-scooters, reckless cycling, and things like litter picking, site clean-up, gardening of communal thoroughbreds, cleaning graffiti, basic repairs is the immediate justice consequence. If I move on to 3.27, I've been waiting for this restorative Nottinghamshire launch for a long time. I'm really excited about it. We launched it formally in November. So this is for when it's right for the victim and the perpetrator to make amends. And there's a gentleman speaking at the event. He'd gone away on holiday and been burgled, and it horrified him. And his wife couldn't sleep, and they'd lost some precious stuff. And he actually wanted to meet the person who'd done it. And when he met the young man, he actually felt sorry for him. He thought he'd been targeted for a specific reason, but he hadn't. It was just a random burglary. And the gentleman who'd done the burglary, he had a horrendous backstory, and he'd been based on crack cocaine since he was 12. He was just going anywhere to do a robbery to get his next fix. But actually, from that meeting, the perpetrator realised what an effect he'd had by doing the burglary, and the person who'd had their house broken into realised he hadn't been targeted, he'd done nothing wrong, and it actually helped both of them. And my understanding is that the person didn't perpetrate again, and the person who had been a victim recovered and started sleeping at night. One little story for restorative justice when it can really work. Do you want me to go through loads more? Do you want time for questions?
We have got one or two questions if people have still got the stamina. Got Mrs. Harding first, and then Councillor Williams. Thank you.
Right.
You touched on immediate the justice scheme, and you said how successful it is, and it only started in January. But how many people have actually gone through the system? And presumably that's instead of bringing them to court, you're dealing them. It's an out of court disposal in effect. Could you explain that just a little bit more? Thank you. And also this new restorative justice Nottinghamshire service. I think you were aiming to get 60 face-to-face consultations per year. It started in November, so again, how many people have gone through the system? Thank you.
Thank you, Suma. The immediate justice, it's a slow start because we're doing something different, and we've got to get everybody used to the fact that this new reparative immediate justice scheme is there. I think it's just under 30 we've gone through at the moment.
We can confirm that, I think, afterwards.
Yeah.
Do you want me to explain a little more? So it is new, as the Commissioners said, and there are some things that need to be worked through. And we know from learning in other areas that started before we did, is that numbers started slow and then they increased substantially. So as you said, it did only launch last month. So the numbers are lower at the moment, but they will be growing. And the practical difficulties that are getting in the way of people doing it, those are being worked on now. So we do anticipate a substantial increase.
And does that apply to the restorative Nottinghamshire service as well?
Yes, so on the restorative Nottinghamshire, so you'll appreciate with restorative justice, for it to result in a face-to-face conference, there's a lot of work that needs to happen between an initial referral and making sure that a conference is safe, that the proper risk assessments have been done with the victim and with the offender. So again, we anticipate those numbers rising significantly. And I can confirm the numbers afterwards.
Sorry, just one more question. Does it apply to youths as well?
Which one are we talking? Right, so immediate justice has started off with adults, but I know conversations are being had now to explore from 16 upwards. So immediate justice, we anticipate it will cover 16 to 18-year-olds in time. That hasn't happened yet. On restorative, for restorative Nottinghamshire, yes, it is adults and young people as well.
May I suggest we have a report on this when it's embedded into the system and you've had some results?
Yes,
perhaps in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Woodings, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and ditto in relation to the cybercrime and fraud as well. Conscious of the fact that quite a lot of people who live in the city don't actually have access to the internet and don't have smartphones, but they do get scam phone calls through as well. So I'd be very interested to have an update on that sometime in our work programme as well. Second of all, as you know, we've been told that there's a folding up of Project Reacher. I do want to place on record from the city our gratitude for the effectiveness of Project Reacher. I mean, particularly in Bestwood, in my own ward of Basford as well. They've been fantastic at reconnecting with the community, building trust with the community, and disrupting street drug dealing, something which I've been speaking about at these Police and Crime Commission meetings since I was elected in 2015. So it was an incredibly effective task force, and I want to say thank you to them officially here at the Police and Crime Commissioner meeting, and I really do hope the incredible job they did will carry on in the new neighbourhooding policing teams. I just wanted to come to paragraph 3.26. It's obviously Nottingham is a city of zero tolerance of female genital mutilation, and I noticed that the Accountability Board has said that it covered FGM and honour-based violence at its January meeting. Commissioner, could you give us an overview of your conversation with the Chief Constable? What assurances did you receive, and where do you feel more work needs to be done? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Woodings. I'm really cognizant of the fact that not everybody has smartphones, but actually everybody can be scammed. So with the campaign that we're doing for fraud in February, it's the first time we've done this. I'm going to go try it and going to evaluate to see what happens. We're going to be doing radio ads. We're going to be doing adverts to go alongside articles in the newspaper. There's little NG magazines, which are very cheap to advertise in. We're putting some adverts in there because they go to everybody's door. We're doing some billboards. We're doing some stuff on buses. We're really conscious that not just, yes, we are doing stuff online as well, but I want to make sure we reach as many people as we possibly can, because I'm really worried how many people are being scammed. So that is part. But it's the first time we've done everything like this. We're going to evaluate, see what works best. But fraud is so important as part of the fraud partnership. John Robinson's been working really hard leading the comms cell. It's not just going to be shared by us, it's by all the partners who are involved as well that are going to be sharing the messages to make sure as many people as possible can know how to spot the red flags. That's the line we're using to make sure that they don't. So if somebody contacts them and they're not expecting, if there's a sense of urgency, if they're trying to scare them or excite them, then they're the times that you're really vulnerable to being scammed. So we've got a lot of messaging going out about that. I've just got some notes from the accountability meeting when we were talking about honour-based violence and FGM. So it was earlier this year. So they're integrating the honour-based abuse team into the safeguarding, disruption and intervention unit. So it's part of the whole prevention and safeguarding hub. The police have increased the specialist HBA staff from 2 to 3. Internally, there's been a big campaign around the police about know it, stop it, spot it, a campaign. There's a new dedicated team to prevent and investigate crime against children at risk of CSE. The Internet Child Exploitation team is now using Vigil AI to identify indecent material more quickly. There's a growing use of the rapid video reporting to capture evidence. And the Online Safety Act 2023 placing a positive reporting requirement on online service providers. So there's potential for a significant increase in reported demand there. It's
Could I suggest that perhaps the information is sent out with an addendum at the minutes? Because I noticed one or two people are trying to catch up and they've probably missed some things. Thank you very much, Councillor Wooding. Thank you. Mrs Harding, I think, have you got any other questions on this paper at all?
The other question I wanted to ask was about victims, and I know you have a responsibility for victims. I would just like to know how that's progressing in terms of the criminal justice system, and what are the barriers and challenges, bearing in mind that you put on your list that it's an amber status. It's page 93. Yep.
Sorry, I was just trying to find the right bit, Mrs Harding. The reason I wanted to keep it amber because there's still a lot more work to do. The MOJ are finalising the national template and practice for VCOP compliance. So they want to identify what good looks like. The MOJ is progressing work streams associated with VCOPs as well as the Victim and Prisoners Bill, which is progressing through Parliament. Currently, we quarterly review the VCOP compliance packs, And also, we've reviewed a group of third sector victim service providers where any issues and concerns we've flagged into our Nottinghamshire Local Criminal Justice Board. So I think that's, yeah.
Thank you. You've explained that. I wasn't sure about the amber status, so you've explained that. Thank you.
My apologies to Councillor Richardson and Councillor Newton that I turned 2 pages at the same time. So, Councillor Richardson, I haven't forgotten you, and neither you.
That's fine, thank you. I'm just concerned too about on page 90, 7.1, about the urging forces to prioritise attending domestic burglaries, because I don't know whether they've actually reduced in crime in the last year or so in your attendance as PCC. And it said a golden hour, which is better obviously for outcomes of collecting evidence. Could you just tell me what conversations you may have had with the Chief Constable over this? In the first instance, when it was Accountability Board, and since that board or previously to that, can you tell me if there's any difference in between the crime reported or the evidence that we've got that an hour has been fulfilled?
Thank you very much, Councillor. Nottinghamshire Police has for a long time offered visits to home dwellings that have had domestic burglaries. I am in the last Accountability Board. I checked that was still the case, because sadly not all forces are doing that, and I'm confident that it is happening here in Nottinghamshire.
Thank you.
Mr. Bob Vaughan Newton, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to page 93, the only activity in the delivery plan with a red status relates to working with partners to implement the Sexual Violence Pathfinder programme. Can you please update the panel on progress against this activity, what action you're taking to turn it from red to green, and when you're expecting that to happen?
I'm just going to pass over to Nicola.
Yeah, thank you. This is funding that we got from NHS England, and it's aimed at sexual violence survivors with multiple and complex needs and the most severe mental ill health. There have been delays with this project. Some of that has been about partner agencies. In fact, much of it has been about partner agencies. So we're working with the Trust, both the ICB but also the Healthcare Trust. And there have been a number of meetings set up that, for various reasons, including some quite significant ill health, those meetings had to be postponed. However, we now have a project manager who's working on it and who is driving that forward. So I do anticipate some quite substantial progress in the next 3 months. Okay.
Thank you for that, and thank you for your responses. That takes us to item 8 on the agenda, the independent scrutiny activity, which is here for information, unless anyone wishes to raise any question for the Commissioner. Mrs. Dalby, thank you.
Thank you. Looking at the fact that you've recruited 2 new members to the panel, of the 3 areas scrutinised, the numbers seem to be particularly low of the amount of scrutiny that you've taken. So I wondered if you want to comment on that, and could you say how the cases are selected for scrutiny as well? Thank you.
Yes, so there are only a handful of cases reviewed at each scrutiny session, and that's really so that we can have a proper full deep dive effectively. They look at the call records, they look at the incident logs, they look at body-worn video. There's a lot of information that comes together around each of those individual cases, so they follow it right through the course. In terms of how the cases are selected, is independent community scrutiny panel. It's very independent in the fact that it's chaired independently by members of the group. The cases are selected independently So the members have access to a Power BI dashboard, and in which they're able to filter and select by age, ethnicity, area, the type of case, and they select a handful of cases, which are then shared with the OPCC and the force in order to provide the details of the cases. So it's complete random selection, independently led by the panel members.
Thanks. I'm glad to see it's a random selection, but there seem to be 3 cases for each category selected. Do you know what this is as a percentage?
I don't offhand. It will depend what topic they're looking at. So we get 2,500 stop and searches, for example. So it would be a very small, obviously, proportion of those. In terms of hate crime, I'm not too sure what proportion, but and that's a year. They'll be looking on a quarterly basis. There'll be a handful, sort of 5 cases or so selected. So the proportion will depend on the topic ultimately.
So perhaps you could provide us with that information.
Sure. Yeah, can do.
Thank you, Councillor Mohammed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Given the intrusive and contentious nature of stop and search, it's always been cited for one of the main reasons for breakdown of trust and confidence within BAME communities and the misuse of it. I've got to say, given that it was a random sample of 3, it is disappointing to see that there was a failure not to use Go Wisely properly, that there was a failure in the samples of the body-worn camera not being switched on 2 occasions at the right time, to witness that we know that the proper process was used at the beginning. Also, it's worrying that the inspectorate comments that the frequency of the panel doesn't meet enough. It's what assurances, Commissioner, have you got from the Chief Constable regarding process and the qualitative nature of the exchange? It also shows to be poor. And also, is this a trend? I know there's only 3, but is this something indicative throughout all of them, or is this a common experience, or is this just absolutely random and just poor examples you caught in the randomness, or is this just the normal exchange?
Seems to stop working. There we go. Yeah, probably sort of partly challenge some of that the observation there, in that there are some excellent examples of good practice that are emerging as part of the stop and search scrutiny. So one of the examples here is around the patient and polite way in which the detaining officer detain the individual and put them at ease. So we are also capturing that good practice and making sure that's disseminated. In terms of the 2 examples that you mentioned around the Go Wisely and the body worn video, they're actually interrelated, in that I think the criticism was that because the body worn video was turned on late on that particular occasion, or slightly late, it wasn't possible to see the lead up to the stop and provide assurance that the Go Wisely principles were followed. So it doesn't necessarily state that they didn't follow them. It's just that they didn't have the evidence, the full suite of evidence at that point in time. But I think the assurance that we can give is that all of this feedback is certainly being used by the force and is being filtered through sort of training materials and briefings and updates to officers. And the stop and the ISCP are being updated on how those actions are being followed up, and if they're dissatisfied with the action that's been taken, they also have within the terms of reference the ability to request chief officer attendance to sort of directly sort of question and follow up on the areas that they feel haven't been fully followed up.
Did you want to come back, Councillor?
So we're not in a court of law, so process is process, and these are highly trained professional police officers. It isn't beyond one's expectation to hope that process is followed. Given the historical nature of the intrusiveness of stop and search of BAME people within the city of Nottingham, and the low confidence of trust and confidence we're seeing in women over misogyny, over BAME communities historically, with young people, I'd see it all as unnecessary home goals that are being scored. It's just unnecessary. We've got a race plan, we've got lots going on, But if basic processes are not being followed and the experience isn't a good experience, bad news travels a lot faster than good news in the community.
Did you want to come back in, Commissioner, or is this something you'd like to bring to outside the meeting or to bring to a future meeting?
Could we do some more work on this, Sarge? Thank you.
And then we can bring it back to a future meeting.
We're working really hard on the race action plan. There's loads of really good stuff we're doing, and I've got a lot of confidence in this.
Thank you. That brings us, unless there's any further questions, that brings us to the end of business this afternoon, and I duly declare the meeting closed, and thank you.
Thank you.
What is Operation Pearl? I must miss that out.
You know, Donna Hockenden doing the maternity